What if I told you? The world's nuclear chessboard just cracked open, and the hand that moved the Queen came not from Washington, not from Moscow, but from Ouagadougou. Picture this: a sleek Russian jet, escorted by fighter planes, tears across international airspace, not to rescue a diplomat, not to deliver aid, but to personally escort a 36-year-old African military captain, a man the West once laughed off as a rebel, to sign a deal that just made him the most unpredictable player in global power. Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso, didn't just visit Moscow. He arrived like a storm and left with a nuclear pact that's sending shockwaves from Brussels to Beijing. This isn't aid. This isn't optics. This is the end of the old game and the birth of a new world. A world where Africa doesn't beg to join the table. It builds its own with uranium underfoot and sovereign fists on top. In this video you'll see how a single signature between Traoré and Vladimir Putin could unravel decades of Western dominance, elevate West Africa to atomic relevance, and awaken a continent long silenced. Forget everything you knew about African politics, because the age of passive Africa is over, and if you're not paying attention, you're already behind. Have you ever felt your heart shatter watching Africa drained, our children cold, starving, forgotten? We've suffered enough. It's time to rise and shout. We deserve life, growth, respect. Share this video so our cry reaches heaven and earth. For a free, strong Africa, like, share and subscribe to build a continent rich in dignity and hope. But how did we get here? For decades, Africa was not seen, not truly. To the West, we were statistics in development reports, faces in charity ads, or worse, problems to be managed. Our minerals were shipped away. Our leaders were bought and sold. And our people, we scattered searching for dignity. In the cold streets of Paris, London, Berlin, many of our brothers and sisters still walk with eyes lowered, overqualified, underpaid, treated like shadows in nations, built on the gold and cocoa of their ancestors. Ask them what it feels like to hear the word Africa in the news and brace for another story of famine, war, or corruption. It burns. It humiliates. Because we know the truth: Africa is not poor. It was made poor. And that's why this nuclear agreement matters. It is not just about uranium power plants or technology. It is about rewriting a story, reclaiming agency, saying, for once, we decide what happens next. When Ibrahim Traoré shook Vladimir Putin's hand, it wasn't just a political act. It was symbolic, a message to every African child in the diaspora. You are no longer voiceless. The continent you came from is rising. Africa rising is not a slogan. It's a reckoning. And this deal, as controversial, disruptive, and historic as it is, may just be the loudest declaration yet. Because this time the world will not look away. Not when Africa speaks with nuclear strength. So what exactly is in this deal, and why is the world trembling? Let's be clear, this isn't some backroom handshake over a few research grants. This is a full-scale, state-level nuclear cooperation agreement, authorized directly by the Kremlin, and executed through Russia's atomic energy titan Rosatom. And it's not just about building reactors. It's about rewriting Africa's place in the global order, with Burkina Faso and Mali at the center. The deal includes plans to construct nuclear energy facilities across Burkina Faso and Mali, facilities that will provide long-term electricity solutions to nations crippled by blackouts and energy poverty. But it goes beyond kilowatts. Russia will help build nuclear research centers, supply advanced equipment, and train West African scientists in fields ranging from physics to radiology. There are built-in provisions for medical infrastructure, allowing nuclear technology to be used in cancer treatment, diagnostic imaging, and even food preservation. There's talk of joint agricultural labs, student scholarships, and a pipeline of knowledge transfer, a radical break from decades of extractive partnerships that gave Africa raw contracts and empty promises. But perhaps most powerful is what the agreement doesn't include: conditions. No IMF-style loan strings, no colonial footnotes, just a sovereign deal between equals. At least that's how Traoré presented it. And for many across the continent and the diaspora, that matters more than the reactors themselves. In a continent where Western powers often use aid as a leash, this deal feels different. It feels defiant. It feels African. To critics, it's dangerous. They call it a geopolitical gamble. But to millions of Africans who've watched their leaders trade away dignity for donations, it looks like something else, a line in the sand. Traoré didn't just negotiate, he set terms. And the result is a partnership that challenges not only power grids but power dynamics globally. Because for the first time in modern history, a West African nation has entered the nuclear conversation not as a cautionary tale, but as a strategic player. And make no mistake, the world is watching. The ink may still be drying, but this contract has already sent ripples across continents. Not just because of the energy it will generate, but because of the message it carries. Africa will no longer be defined by scarcity. It will be defined by strength. It takes more than courage to challenge centuries of global hierarchy. It takes vision, precision, and the audacity to believe that you can win. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't rise to global attention because of flashy speeches or social media campaigns. He rose because he did what most African leaders only whispered about. He broke the script, and then he rewrote it. While others begged for seats at Western tables, Traoré built his own carved from Sahel soil, secured with sovereignty and lit by uranium fire. At just 36 years old, he became the world's youngest head of state. But there's nothing naive about his strategy. Traoré doesn't posture, he moves. With a military mind and a philosopher's restraint, he has rejected the traditional model of dependency that shackled so many post-colonial nations. His message to the world: no deal without dignity, no alliance without equality. That's why the nuclear agreement with Russia isn't an act of desperation. It's a calculated pivot. A geopolitical rebellion led not by noise but by negotiation. And it's working. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has gone from geopolitical footnote to front-page headline. He has expelled foreign military forces who operated without transparency. He has nationalized key resources once siphoned away by multinational corporations, and he has spoken openly and fearlessly about Africa's right to chart its own destiny. But what sets Traoré apart isn't just what he resists, it's what he builds. He has launched infrastructure projects focused on energy, agriculture, and education. He's empowered youth not with slogans but with schools, land and tools. His government offers not just hope, but plans, timelines, execution. To Africans living abroad in the cold grey streets of Brussels or the cramped suburbs of Paris, Traoré is more than a president. He's a mirror of what might have been, of what still could be. A man who speaks without fear, who leads without apology, and who reminds us that being African is not a handicap, it's a heritage. Some Western leaders label him anti-democratic, some say radical, but ask the mothers in rural Burkina Faso who now have clinics. Ask the young engineers returning home to build reactors. Ask the millions who, for the first time in decades, feel pride when they hear their country's name on the news. Traoré is not chasing Western validation. He is crafting a future where Africa leads, not follows. And with every bold decision, every unapologetic word, he draws a new line in history. This is not the Africa of pity. This is the Africa of power. The ink on the nuclear agreement had barely dried when panic set in, not in Ouagadougou, not in Bamako, but in the polished halls of Washington, Brussels, and Paris. Because this deal didn't just bring reactors to Burkina Faso, it detonated something far more dangerous to the old order. The idea of an Africa that no longer waits for permission. For decades, nuclear diplomacy was a club reserved for the so-called responsible powers. Africa's role: supplier of raw uranium, receiver of lectures, always on the periphery of high-stakes technology. But Traoré just flipped that table. And the West is rattled. This isn't how it was supposed to go. African leaders were supposed to stay in line, grateful for aid, silent about exploitation. Instead, a 36-year-old soldier signed a deal that repositions West Africa not as charity, but as calculation. Not as a pawn, but a player. Russia, of course, gains strategic depth, a foothold in the heart of a region long courted by the West. But even more profoundly, Burkina Faso gains leverage, the kind of diplomatic weight few African nations have ever held. Now Western analysts are scrambling. Think tanks are issuing urgent memos. Media outlets speak of growing Russian influence and regional destabilization. But under the panic is something else, something unspoken. Fear. Fear that this is not an outlier but a blueprint, that other nations will follow. that the facade of Western benevolence is cracking, that a multipolar world once theoretical is unfolding, and it includes voices from the Sahel. Burkina Faso may be small, but with this deal, it just punched above its weight and landed hard. Africa Rising is no longer a hopeful headline. It's a geopolitical reality, and for the first time in generations, Africa isn't being spoken for. It's speaking loudly, clearly, and with uranium in hand. This is no longer just about Burkina Faso. It's about a continental recalibration, and the heart of it beats through the Alliance of Sahel States AES, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. Three nations once treated as unstable, now forging a bloc defined not by crisis but by clarity. In January, the AES formally withdrew from ECOWAS, a move dismissed by some as rash. But look closer, it was a declaration of intent. These nations are done being punished for refusing foreign interference. They're building new frameworks on their terms. This nuclear deal is their cornerstone. It binds them not just through energy or defense, but through vision. A shared belief that Africa's survival depends on unity, not compliance. Through this alliance, they're coordinating military defense, technology transfer, and infrastructure development like never before. No longer fragmented, they're synchronizing their power. And Traoré, he's not just leading Burkina Faso, he's becoming the spiritual architect of a regional awakening, a voice that says, we don't need to choose between superpowers, we choose ourselves. The AES isn't just a reaction. It's a prototype, one that could redefine African integration across the continent. And while old alliances crumble, this new one is forging steel in the fire of pressure, not just to survive, but to rise. Because in unity, Africa doesn't echo, it resonates. What lies ahead is more than just reactors and megawatts. It's a new intellectual and strategic era for West Africa. This deal opens the door to scientific research hubs, nuclear engineering programs, and cross-border collaboration that could turn the Sahel from fragile to formidable. Young Africans will no longer dream of labs in Europe or scholarships abroad. They'll find opportunity at home, built with their own hands, powered by their own soil. Nuclear medicine facilities are being planned, not imported, to treat diseases that once claimed lives silently. Agricultural labs will use radiation to preserve food, strengthen harvests, and reduce dependence on unstable global supply chains. And the biggest shift of all, Africa becomes a teacher, a knowledge exporter, a policymaker, a voice no longer missing from the room but chairing the conversation. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as landlocked and irrelevant, may soon become the nerve center of a new African century. This is the future Traoré sees. Not just a nation lit by nuclear energy, but a continent reignited by pride, purpose, and precision. The reactors are coming, but so are the minds. And they're not coming to follow, they're coming to lead. From a private jet, escorted through international skies, to a nuclear signature that shook the world. One moment, one man, one message. Africa is not waiting anymore. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just cut a deal, he cracked open history. With the stroke of a pen, he repositioned Burkina Faso from the margins to the center, not as a victim but as a visionary. And now the world watches. But this isn't just about politics. It's about every African child told their dreams were too big. Every migrant mother working 3 jobs in silence. Every voice that felt erased. This deal is for you. Because a nuclear future isn't just about energy. It's about dignity, autonomy, legacy. So what happens when Africa no longer knocks at the door but builds the house? You're watching it. And now we ask you, will you be part of this moment? Will you raise your voice with us? Share this video so the world hears our roar. Shade, like and subscribe, not for clicks but for a cause. Shade. And remember, Africa Rising is not a dream. It's already here. We're not waiting. We're not asking. We're building. I speak not as a journalist, nor as a politician, but as a son of the soil, a child of Africa, born of the red earth, the unforgiving sun, and the silence of generations forgotten. I have walked streets in Europe where people look at me but do not see me. I have sat in classrooms where my voice was treated like an accent, not an idea. And yet every beat of my heart whispered something I never dared say aloud. Africa is more. Africa is rising. When I saw that Russian jet fly through the sky carrying Ibrahim Traoré, not as a beggar of aid but as a broker of power, I cried, Not tears of weakness, but of recognition. I saw in him the spirit of Sankara, the wisdom of Lumumba, the fire of Nkrumah. I saw the birth of a new Africa. One that doesn't knock but builds. One that doesn't ask but declares. We were colonized, broken, renamed. Our resources drained our youth, exported our stories rewritten by those who never loved us. But this deal, this pact between Traoré and Putin is not about uranium. It is about dignity. It is about saying once and for all, Africa will no longer be the world's raw material pit. Africa is reborn. And in that rebirth I see light. Africa Rising is not a media slogan. It is not a branding trick. It is a spiritual awakening. It is the moment we realized our power was never gone, only buried. Now we dig. Now we rise. From Accra to Bamako, from Nairobi to Ouagadougou, Africa Rising is written on the faces of our youth, our farmers, our women no longer waiting but moving. Some say Africa is not ready for nuclear power, but they said we weren't ready for books, for banks, for ballots, and each time we proved them wrong. Nuclear power in our hands is not about weapons. It is about water, light, medicine, and future. This is the heartbeat of a new Africa. This is where we write our story, not in fear, but in fusion. To my brothers and sisters in the diaspora, you were never lost. You were scattered, and now we gather, because Africa Reborn needs you. Not just your remittances, but your mind, your presence, your pride. Africa Reborn is not about going back. It's about going forward together. Every village that builds a school instead of a checkpoint. Every leader who signs deals on equal footing. Every young girl who chooses science instead of silence. This is Africa Rising. It is not loud, but it is relentless. It is not perfect, but it is powerful. It is not coming, it is here. Education is the soil of Africa Reborn. We cannot talk of sovereignty without science. We cannot dream of independence without engineers. This deal gives us more than reactors. It gives us the right to imagine. It gives us the new Africa built not on borders but on brilliance. So let the world watch. Let them fear or doubt. But let them know Africa Rising is real. Africa Rising is irreversible. Africa Rising is now. This is our moment. This is our voice. This is our victory, not just of power, but of purpose.